What's going on, guys? Today we are taking a look at North Carolina basketball ahead of the 2024-2025 season. And with that being said, we're going to take a step back and look at last year before we jump ahead to next season. So last year, North Carolina 29-8. They had a really good year. They finished first in the ACC under Hubert Davis, who has had a really good run at North Carolina so far, taking them to a Sweet 16 in a national championship game. Now, they went 25-6 in the regular season. They went 2-1 in the ACC tournament before losing to in-state rival NC State. And then they also went 2-1 in the NCAA tournament before losing to Alabama in what was a really good game. And so during the offseason, they lost a few guys, most notably Armando Bacot, who after 5 years at North Carolina does not have any more eligibility and has moved on. Also, Harrison Ingram entered the NBA draft, who was a very important piece for them last year. And Cormac Ryan also left the program. He was also out of eligibility. And Paxton Wojcik is also gone. He was a fringe rotation piece. I would say he was like the 8th or 9th man for North Carolina last season. So with that being said, losing Bacot, Ingram, Cormac Ryan, those are big shoes to fill. Key rotation pieces, especially in different ways. Like Bacot, was really their lone big. Yes, Jalen Washington was his backup, but the minutes there's a big minutes disparity there, right? And then Ingram and Cormac Ryan were the other three-point shooters on this team besides RJ Davis, who, really only had three-point shooters who were consistent shooters on the team last year. So, speaking of RJ Davis, he's sticking around for his 5th season at Chapel Hill, along with his backcourt mate, Elliot Cadeau. And I felt like they had a really good partnership last year with RJ Davis being the scoring guard and Cadeau being the pass-first point guard. Seth Trimble decided to stick around after entering his name in the transfer portal, and he's going to be an important piece. He's a really excellent defender, and I think if he can continue to improve as a shooter, there will be more opportunities for them to play 3-guard lineups. Jalen Washington, as I mentioned before, he's in for a big minutes increase, a big role increase this year, and I thought he looked good in limited minutes for North Carolina. I'm most intrigued by his 3-point shot and whether, that's going to be something with extended minutes that he could, hit a 3 per game, let's say, because that would really help the spacing for North Carolina. And then lastly, Jalen Withers, who, transferred in from Louisville, and I really felt like especially the second game against Duke had some really big moments for North Carolina. He had some other games with big moments. He's just an energy rebounding forward who helps out on the defensive end of the court and finds opportunities to score offensively. So you've got those 5 guys. And then incoming, you've got 2 really highly touted freshmen in Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. I feel like in some ways Drake Powell, maybe because of the attention on Ian Jackson, is being a little bit slept on. I think Drake Powell is going to be a very good player for North Carolina. Along with key transfers in Cade Tyson, who's a good shooter from Belmont, and Ven Allen Lubin, who's a forward, maybe center, who played at Vanderbilt last season. Vanderbilt was not very good. He transferred to Vanderbilt from Notre Dame, and he had good numbers, like 12 points, 6 rebounds or so. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see whether he plays more power forward or center for North Carolina this upcoming season. Lastly, 2 guys who I think will be just outside the rotation are James Brown, who looks to be like a reserve big man, just outside the top 100 as a freshman recruit, and Tyson Claude, who came over from Georgia Tech, played about 17, 18 minutes per game at Georgia Tech. So I think he's a nice reserve piece for Hubert Davis and North Carolina. So moving into this upcoming season, right, we've got some notable games, specifically in the non-conference portion of the schedule, where early on they have a road game at Kansas, at Fog Allen. That's just excellent scheduling. And really quick, I want to take a little bit of a detour here. North Carolina, as we'll get into, has a lot of high-profile non-conference matchups, and they've been doing that for a little while now. And John Shire spoke about how, with how the ACC is viewed by some of the metrics with the tournament. It's important for Duke and North Carolina to get these high-profile games, non-conference games early to beef up their tournament resume. And Hubert Davis has done a tremendous job with his scheduling for that very reason alone. So mention Kansas, then you have the Maui Invitational, where they start off with Dayton, and if they win that game, or actually no matter what, they're going to play Auburn or Iowa State, which is a tremendous matchup either way. Both teams, I think Auburn's like top 10, top 15. I think Iowa State is legitimately a top 5 team coming into next season. So those are going to be great tests for North Carolina early. And if they are to get to the championship game in Maui, it could be against UConn or Michigan State, among others. And so there's potential for some great matchups for North Carolina in Maui. Then they got the SEC Challenge against Alabama at home, another great high-profile matchup early on. They play Florida also at home as part of the Jumpman Invitational. And then lastly, non-conference notable games-wise, they play UCLA at the Garden. So as far as I can tell, you're looking at 6 pretty high-profile non-conference games before you get to January for North Carolina. I think it's going to be a lot of opportunities to test out this new team because while there are a lot of players returning, the makeup of the team is going to be very different, losing those 3 key players in Bacot, Harrison Ingram, and Cormac Ryan. The conference schedule, they play home and away against Duke, NC State, and Pitt. So they're 2 rivals, and Pittsburgh there, who I think is going to have a good team this year. They just missed out on the tournament. NC State, we'll have to see. They've lost a lot of what made them special on their run last season. Now, they had some decent players come in, but very new team. We'll see how the pieces fit together for NC State. And Duke looks like a very good team on paper. So home games for the conference portion of the schedule. So these are only home games. They won't play home and away against these opponents. That's Boston College, Cal, Georgia Tech, Miami, SMU, Stanford, and Virginia. And then the away games will be Clemson, Florida State, Louisville, Notre Dame, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. So how do I see this season shaping up for North Carolina, and what questions do I have with this team? So last year's team was a really good defensive team, one of the better defensive teams that Hubert Davis has had, and they were a good offensive team, but like I mentioned before, they had 3 3-point shooters, and then outside of that, there was question marks, and so sometimes the spacing or the offensive flow wasn't the best, and they were heavily reliant on R.J. Davis, which is why they lost the game to Alabama. He just didn't have a good game, and so they weren't able to overcome that. And so this year's team, I think, is positioned to be a little bit faster, a little bit smaller, though, and probably a better shooting team, but that all depends on who Hubert Davis decides to play. And what I mean by that is this. The power forward spot is going to be the most intriguing spot for me with this team because we're not sure if Elliot Cadeau is going to be able to be a consistent 3-point shooter. He had moments last year, but it really wasn't his strength. So that's going to be a key thing to watch going into this season, how he does behind the 3-point line. We know R.J. Davis is going to be able to knock down shots. And I think actually Jalen Washington is a capable 3-point shooter. So the questions are in between. And so at that power forward position, is he going to look to play small or play big? If he plays big with Van Allen Lubin, most likely, maybe Jalen Withers gets a start. But I would think if he's going to start a power forward, it would be Lubin. Your 3-point shooting is going to take a little bit of a ding because Lubin, while he shot 1.5 attempts per game, he only made 33% of them. He's just not much of a 3-point shooter. However, if they decide they want to play small and put, let's say, Kate Tyson out there in the starting lineup, right? And so you've got RJ Davis, Elliot Cadeau, Kate Tyson. Maybe you still go with a forward in Lubin or Withers, but I feel like there's a lot of hype right now around Ian Jackson, so I'd be surprised if he doesn't start. So it'd be a really small starting lineup. I get that. However, there would be a lot better spacing and floor balance on this team, which I think would enable a better offensive team. Now, defensively, there'd be certainly questions, and that's the question for Hubert Davis going into the season, which is why my next question is size. So, with Armando Bacot and Harrison Ingram, it was a big team. I know Harrison Ingram is like 6'7", but he's like 235. You weren't moving Harrison Ingram. As a matter of fact, most times he was moving you. And so it was a somewhat smaller team in the sense that they had 3 guards. With those 2 guys, you weren't really worried about it, along with the fact that Ingram, at least early on in the season, was hitting his threes and found them in big moments as well later on in the season. So the question is, how do they find the balance this year with size versus three-point shooting? And that's the question that Hubert Davis has to answer, because on paper, there's a lot of very talented guys. There's just some question as to how the pieces are going to fit together. We know RJ Davis is going to play a lot of minutes, majority of minutes. Elliot Cadeau is going to play a lot of minutes. I think Jalen Washington is going to play 25, 30 minutes. And so the question is, how does everyone else fit in? Like, how many minutes does Drake Powell get? I think Ian Jackson starts, but Drake Powell might be a better option just because he's a bigger wing, and it gives the starting lineup more size. So maybe you do something like Drake Powell and Kate Tyson. How does Seth Trimble fit in? He thought about transferring out from the program. He decided to stay. I think he's a guy who deserves more minutes, but I understand it's difficult based off of his position. So there's a lot of questions with this team heading into next season. I still think this is going to be a very good team that contends for the top of the ACC along with Duke next season. And there's probably going to be a surprise ACC team that at least I'm not thinking of right now that is going to be up there contending this season. I think they're a little bit worse than last year just because of, I think they have to pick between kind of like offense or defense, whereas last year I felt like it was a little bit more balanced because of Harrison Ingram. So with that being said, I think their regular season record is going to be more like 23-8 than it was last year, where it was 25-6. I think they'll take some losses, in the non-conference play, but I don't think they're going to be quite as good in conference, which is where they did most of their damage last year. They were 17-3, finishing first in conference. So I think 23-8 regular season for North Carolina is in the cards. I'm curious, what do you guys think? What other college teams would you like to see me preview? We've got a couple of months before the season starts, so plenty of time here to get some content in. Please subscribe to the channel for more great college basketball and NBA draft content. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.